Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought I would do a quick video looking at a film called They Shall Not Grow Old. Now, what this movie documentary is a look at World War One by Peter Jackson and some others, and what they try and do is, in their own words, bring history to life, so we never forget it. And the way they do this is through digital enhancement by basically adding colour and definition to a lot of old videos which have none. And what this does is it brings it into a world which we would class as maybe a little bit closer to home. So we can kind of understand the perils which happened at that time and kind of understand, what was going on. Now, we saw success with a bunch of series which decided to do this. World War II in colour, if you want to see on Netflix, does this very well. The only issue with World War II in colour is that its contrast of everything is through the roof. And when we look at They Shall Not Grow Old, it seems like they've fixed that. So what I'm going to do is go through some things I liked about this, some things I thought could have been improved, but mainly just my overall thoughts of it. So the first thing to go through is the fact of how did the colouring work. So for the first, I'd say 20 minutes of the film, it was black and white. And the reason for this is because it seemed like they wanted the old-timey footage to represent the start of everything and also the end. So the start of the film, for the first 20, is black and white, and then it moves to a coloured version of it, and then the aftermath, which is, the last 10 minutes or so, it goes back to the black and white, small frame and everything like this. So, with that said, what does each part represent? So the start was the training, the beginning of the war, basically the soldiers in Britain getting ready to fight. This film does resonate around, the British soldiers of World War One. It goes through, first of all, their training, how they enlist, some shady tactics people use to get people to enlist, and mainly the general feel of people before going to war, and also how rigorous the training was. Now, as the videos transfer them going through, going through France, going through Belgium, when they hit the front line, the video expands and it goes into colour. It is a wonderful transition. It works really well, and until the war ends, in the documentary or the film documentary, I know it's annoying to say, but that's what it is, then everything is in colour. Apart from some stills here and there, which are actually in black and white, but the majority, I'd say 80%, 90%, is in colour. And then after, once the guns fall silent, once people start going home, the aftermath of World War One or the First World War is in black and white. So the idea is that when you're on the front line, or when you're actually participating in the war, everything is in colour, everything else is seen in black and white. Now, I'm sure this was an artistic choice, it makes sense. I personally would have preferred it all to be colour, or maybe they could have transitioned more from the colour to black and white, because there was only maybe one or two times they did this, where I think it would have been much better to show the difference between the film that they actually had compared to, what they digitally enhanced it to be. Instead, what we got was quite a lot of stills and quite a lot of either black and white or coloured photos, which were obviously digitally enhanced themselves. But I think it would have been nice to see, what they were working with compared to what they produced. And maybe this would come out in a documentary of this film documentary, but maybe that, comes along the line. Also, something that was cool was the fact that through the whole thing, there was commentary from war veterans. And I think if you're going to make a film like this, which is centered around not forgetting, the dead and also the people who served, you've got to do it with veterans behind the wheel. And that's exactly what happened here. It's why when you watch the Pacific series, or when you watch the Band of Brothers series, with the commentary from the people who are actually there, it makes it special. It puts you in the moment. It makes you feel like you are experiencing what they did experience, because they can describe it to a T. And that's exactly what happens in this. Throughout the whole film, it is commentary from veterans who were there. So that aspect was perfect. It's much better to have that than a narrator. There were a few points where it did seem like there was some kind of narrator going on, basically talking about what was going on, but once again, the majority of it was the commentary from the veterans themselves. One criticism I will say when we're talking about, the going from the black and white to the color, obviously the transitions, one thing that stood out massively to me, and this might just be because my ears are attuned to it nowadays because of the editing that I do, but the audio jumped. It jumped from generally not, just a normal audio, and it jumped maybe a few decibels up, and the gain was increased a lot. Now, the reason why they did this, you can tell why they did this, because in the colored version, they also have a lot of background noise. They have a lot of ambience noise, whether it be people walking, whether it be general chatter, whether it be explosions, whether it be horses, they do bring it to life in that way. But at the same time, to make sure that you can hear the commentators, they increase their volume. So there is a sudden jump, which is very noticeable from when it goes from black and white to color. And that is something that, you have to watch out for, because it was something that kind of caught me off guard as somebody who was listening intently. Like, the fact that you'll be able to tell yourself when the gain on somebody changes that dramatically, then it stands out to you, even though you may not know why. Another thing was the video quality. So, obviously, with a lot of these old films, some of the video quality is going to be better than others, and because of this, there is a few problems with transferring it to color. And what I mean by this is, if you have, let's say you have a painting. The painting is perfect. And then in a small corner, or in, let's say, just slight off the right center, there is a hole. Or there is a part which is not perfect. Your eyes are instinctively drawn to that imperfection. And this is something that happened in the film. A lot of the times I was drawn to areas which did not look correct. Whether it was two feet getting melded together as they passed each other, or whether it was a face that looked more like a faceless man than, an actual person, or maybe a light was off somewhere. And I found myself getting drawn to these a lot, and it's not really a fault of the people creating it, because no matter how well you do, there's always going to be imperfections, but it's just one of those odd things which was kind of distracting. Like, a lot of the times for me, when I was looking at, because there was a lot of, I suppose you'd call it screens, of where they would zoom in on a specific point of a video, and then they would scroll across to different people on the in the screen. So basically, you take a big picture, right, on the original video, and then what you do is you scroll into a certain point so you can move the camera in post effects to look at different faces. Now, because you're doing this, you're already screwing with the video quality because you're zooming in. And secondly, by movement, that's also going to screw with everything. So it is very easy to pick out imperfections, and something else that happened during this was in a lot of these movements, the light balance was wrong on a lot of the faces, and it actually made them look a lot more cartoony than I believe they should have been. And it was kind of odd being described, being described by the commentators, how awful it was in the trenches, the fact that they didn't wash for weeks, the fact that they didn't really have, latrines. There was even stories of basically having a place where you had to defecate in a trench, which is always interesting to listen about. But there was all of these things which built up a vision of dirt, a vision of disgust, a vision of stench. And then you see some of the pictures, and it's literally guys who are sat there with very bright faces with nothing on them. And I feel like this was a problem with the post effects. It must have been, because I've seen some of these old footage which this is actually based off, and you can see the dirt. So somebody has digitally enhanced it to make them look cleaner. And that is fair enough, if you want to do that. But it means that the light balance is wrong, and it makes stuff look cartoony. It makes stuff look kind of silly. Another thing to do with the techniques that they used, whenever there was a slow motion video going on, if they slowed down the video at any point, it looked a lot worse. And the reason for this is because it was easier to spot the imperfections that were going on. But apart from that, I thought the coloured stuff was great. The one problem with the World War II in colour is the fact that the contrast is way too high. In this, I didn't think that was an issue. I just thought that a lot of the, muck was kind of overlooked, I think would be the way to put it. But overall, I thought it was very good. I just hoped that there was less stills and less of the black and white at the beginning. I think that could have been done in colour, but I understand that it is an arduous process to be able to do all of this. So either they ran out of time or ran out of budget, or that was the idea from the beginning. It all works, whatever it was, it does work. It would have just been nice for me, personally, to see a bit more colour. On top of this, one of the things I did think was very good and very important from a film like this, which is supposed to be, a documentary, it's supposed to actually teach you something, there was no pull punches. And what this means is they showed a lot of dead bodies, and obviously in colour you could see, all of the blood, you could see ripped legs, you could see all sorts of manner of injuries. On top of this, they also went into a lot of detail about conditions in the trenches, and also showed a lot of images of stuff like trench foot and stuff like, not ringworm, but stuff very close to it. So when they were talking about diseases, when they were talking about the actual the actual death and the stench and all of the horribleness that generally is forgotten about in the First World War, they did not pull any punches, and I was very, very happy about that, because normally that is something that's kind of glossed over. Like, you get told it was trench warfare, but that was about it. I think in this, the fact that it had that visual aid as well, where it could show you exactly how it was, like, there were literally pictures and the commentary going along. There was a specific part where they were talking about in, the autumn/winter, and what was happening is their trenches would go from trenches and become basically streams of water. And what this meant was you would sleep while basically just being in water. And this is something where you didn't sleep for weeks. You didn't not sleep for weeks. You didn't wash for weeks. You were constantly in this water, and obviously that's going to cause a lot of diseases. They also went through the rats idea, and on top of all of this, one of the things that for me was most striking was obviously the psychological damage. Something that was interesting throughout the commentary is the commentary start, and I'm sure this was a definite choice. The start of the commentary, when it's talking about the before the war, so it's talking about signing up, it's talking about the issues with people's ages, it's talking about the training, all of this stuff. It's very chipper, very happy, We were organized, we knew what was going on, yada yada. And as you progress through, once you get to the end, there is a bitterness. There is a fact that we did what we had to do, we didn't like doing it, it was horrible. There's a gradual mental decline from even the commentators themselves when they're describing everything, and I think this is very, very important for the general viewer. It doesn't ever turn to anger, though. Instead, it turns more into depression and disappointment, and I think this is a good message to give out, because if it turned to anger or resentment, I think that would be the wrong message. But overall, yes, the tone goes straight from chipper, and as you gradually move down to the end of the war, and even after the war, the tone was horrible. And that's exactly how it should be, because that's exactly how it was in real life. So, another thing, moving on from that point, that the film did was it made a lot of the times, especially, the start, when it was black and white, and even during and after, there was this idea that there is no clear right side in the war. So there was plenty of references talking about why are we fighting the Germans. All we knew was we had to fight the Germans, but we didn't know why, and therefore the Germans became the enemy. And all of this. Basically, the narrative that was spun to a lot of people was that Germany wanted to expand its empire, therefore the British had to come in and stop them. Which, to be honest, depending on who you believe, that is true, that is not true. Once again, not getting into the argument here. So, there was a clear point in the film when the British start advancing, start winning, and the commentators start really humanizing the Germans. And what they do is they talk about them as if they were themselves. And it's quite nice, actually. They talk about how the Germans are just them, just in a different cloth. They're family people, they're nice people, and most of them don't even want to fight by the end of the war. So you can see that there is a general belief in this film that the general German was not the bad person, it was the people controlling them. And that's fair enough, if that's the narrative that wants to be put forward. On top of this, there was quite a funny line midway through. They were talking about how they did a few, kind of kidnappings, basically get some prisoners. And some of the British lads were like, oh, the Germans were very nice. The Bavarians were wonderful people. Like, one of the great things about the Bavarians, they were very respectable. The Prussians, though, oh no, not the Prussians. Like, there was some very clear divides, depending on which German you run into. Bavarians were seen as kind of nice, very organized. Prussians were just seen as cold, hard assholes. So, there's a very funny thing there for me. And obviously a lot of that is down to like personal opinion and stuff. But from my experiences, it's just very hilarious. But on top of this, the last thing that I think is very important is the fact that they didn't just focus on the war itself. They focused on before the war, even though they focused mainly on the training and what the men had to go through. I think that was very good. Focusing on the issues on why the war started can get very murky and can confuse people before they've started the film. So focusing on the individual man instead of, the collective idea was a great idea. And that was another thing, that went through in the film. Then in the aftermath, when it went back to black and white, they also looked at it, and I was very, very happy about this. One of the main things that no First World War film that I can think of ever goes into is what happens to the soldiers after the war. Same with the Second World War films as well. There are a few TV series out there which do deal with these issues. Foyle's War, if you've ever seen that, the detective show that actually goes into it and what happened to a lot of soldiers. But for the First World War, unless you really look into it, you never really taught about it, or nobody really talks about it. And that's because the soldiers themselves at the time, they never really talked about it either. They were told that they would come home and they would be treated like heroes. Well, it was a farce, the whole thing. There was even a lot of them who struggled to find work. There were many like office owners or, CEOs who refused to hire soldiers. No servicemen allowed. All of this stuff. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it. A set of people who just fought for your country and you are turning your back on them. Very, very odd. And you can understand why a lot of them became very resentful very, very quickly. There was also another thing that was also talked about, and I think this is also good to talk about. So they go into why, nobody really ever opened up about the war itself. And the first thing that is brought up is the fact that nobody would understand it. Like, nobody would understand what it was like. And I think this is true as well. But it would have been nice if stories were spread back then which told the story like this film does of what these guys went through. Because then there would be a lot more empathy, there would be a lot more sympathy, and I think a lot more people would want to remember them for the heroes that they were. And I really hope that is the message of this film at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how well this film does. It doesn't matter, if you find the digital effects that great, because they are good. But the main message to take away from this was, these were human beings, they were put through a horrible time, and they got nothing out of it. So, if you ever run into a bunch of human beings who are put through a horrible amount of time for your benefit, you better at least thank them. You better at least be there to help them when they need it. That's what I took away from it, and I hope other people do too. Anyway, overall, I enjoyed this. I would recommend this to a lot of people, especially ones who are unfamiliar with the First World War. It gives a very, very general overview of what happened, but overall, it was good. As a last point, the vehicles generally look great as well. They showed tanks, trains, artilleries, and also a few videos of the tanks looked a little bit CG, but overall, it looked good in the colour. But as I said, the main message to take away, look after the people who look after you. It'll work well for you. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.